All right, let's jump right into this explainer and tackle a massive geological mystery. We're going to explore a framework known as the Unified Theory of Geologic History, or UTGH. This theory takes a radically different look at the ground beneath our feet, and it attempts to answer a very specific question that has honestly puzzled people for decades when looking at alternate Earth histories. Why on earth don't we find human fossils in the geological record?
So here is the core paradox we're dealing with. If we entertain the idea of a pre-flood world where humans and giant dinosaurs were literally walking the Earth at the exact same time, and then a massive global catastrophe wiped them all out simultaneously, why aren't they buried side by side in the rock layers? Seriously, if everything died together, why isn't the fossil record just one giant mixed-up graveyard?
Section 1. Two Views of Earth's History. To impartially unpack this, we first really need to establish the two very different frameworks used to interpret the rock layers. On one side, we have the standard model, uniformitarianism. This framework reads the rocks as millions of years of gradual accumulation. Think deep, slow geological time, where dirt just stacks up, millimeter by millimeter. But on the flip side, the UTGH proposes something entirely different. It argues that those massive sedimentary layers are actually the result of a single, violent planetary rupture event, a massive flood of supercritical water that happened just over 5 millennia ago.
Section 2. The mechanism, moving water.
The author argues that the absolute linchpin to solving this whole missing fossil mystery is a well-documented, observable physical process called hydraulic sorting. Think about it like this. If you take a big glass jar filled with dirt, sand, rocks, and water, shake it up like crazy, and then set it on a table, does everything just settle randomly? Well, no. The water automatically sorts the material based strictly on the laws of physics.
And that right there beautifully illustrates the physics in action. In a catastrophic event, water doesn't just drop everything at once. When a fast, high-energy fluid decelerates, the heaviest, densest particles drop out of suspension first. Then, as the water continues to slow down, the progressively lighter, softer, and more buoyant materials drop out later. So it's not a timeline at all, it's a sorting sequence based purely on weight, density, and drag.
Section 3. The settling column.
So the crucial point the text is making is that while mainstream geology views the rock layers of the geological column as a calendar of eras, where the bottom is the oldest and the top is the youngest, the UTGH argues they're simply the sorted layers of one massive flood. The author suggests these layers don't represent millions of years separating creatures. They represent days, or maybe weeks, separating when different creatures physically sank in the water.
If we map this out chronologically during the proposed flood event, you can kind of see how the author reads the layers. Dense marine shells sink immediately into the lowest muds, right in the first 24 hours. Then, massive heavy-boned dinosaurs are swept up and buried in the middle layers over the next couple of weeks. Finally, the most buoyant and highly mobile life forms actually manage to outlast the heaviest, deadliest phases of sedimentation.
You know those trilobite and brachiopod fossils we find at the very bottom of the fossil record? Mainstream science usually says they're down there because they evolved first and are primitive. But the UTGH proposes they're at the bottom simply because their heavy, calcified, mineralized bodies made them the fastest sinking objects in a hydraulic sorting event. They sank like stones because, well, they were basically built like stones.
Section 4. The human float factor. Which brings us directly to the climax of the UTGH argument regarding human beings. Quoting directly from the text, the author concludes that the lack of human fossils next to dinosaurs isn't some timeline gap, it's just physics. He writes, "The absence of human body fossils is the expected output of flood hydraulics applied to an organism with the specific physical properties of a human being, which floats."
Following the logic of this specific framework, we have to look closely at our biology. Because humans don't have solid, calcified exoskeletons, and we definitely lack the massive, dense bone structure of a 70-ton dinosaur, we naturally float in water. In a chaotic, high-energy flood environment, a human body just wouldn't be dragged down into those deep, high-pressure sedimentary layers that were rapidly burying the heavy dinosaurs. We'd remain right at or near the surface.
This breakdown perfectly summarizes how the UTGH uses distinct physical traits to explain completely different resting places in the Earth. A trilobite's dense shell forces it to the bottom. A dinosaur's sheer massive bulk gets it caught up and buried in the sweeping middle layers. But a human's soft tissue and relatively low density keeps us floating above those deep fossilization traps entirely. According to the theory, we decayed on the surface or were destroyed by the elements, rather than being preserved under miles of rock.
Section 5. Reinterpreting the record.
So what is the big takeaway from all of this? The UTGH model essentially says that if you change the primary mechanism from deep time to moving water, alleged anomalies like missing human fossils suddenly become the exact predictable result of basic physics. It challenges us to look at the fossil record not as a strict calendar of evolution, but as a physical ledger of how different bodies react to high-speed water. It's a great reminder that every scientific model relies on assumptions, and changing the core assumption changes the entire story.
I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. If this alternative framework is right, and the ground beneath us is actually a massive, hydraulically sorted settling tank rather than an absolute timeline, how much of Earth's history is waiting to be completely reinterpreted? It is a truly fascinating question that asks us to look at the world with fresh eyes. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this explainer today. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.